I'm pleased to announce our next session, AARP's Employer Pledge Program and Synergies with Ames, Colorado. We've heard a lot of mentions today about the AARP Pledge Program, so it is my honor to introduce Heather Tinsley-Fix, a Senior Advisor of Financial Resilience at AARP. Heather works with employers and job seekers, external partners, and academics to provide thought leadership on the value of an age-diverse workforce and shed light on promising age-inclusive practices. She's an integral part of AARP's Employer Pledge Program, which is a nationwide group of employers that stand with AARP in affirming the value of experienced workers and are committed to developing diverse organizations. Her work strives to build age-inclusive organizations that capitalize on the value of experience. So please join me in welcoming Heather.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, and so good to be with all of you today. Usually when I speak at conferences, I start with a disclaimer, which is intended to demystify for the audience why I'm talking to them. I talk a lot to HR leaders and DEI leaders, and mostly in sort of HR contexts or conferences, and so I get friendly but quizzical looks of, why are you here? I thought AARP was about retirement. But luckily I'm here in the room preaching to a great choir, so I don't have to give that disclaimer. I do, however, have to figure out how to work the slides. So the reason that AARP engages with the employer community is tied to our mission. AARP's mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And as we've been hearing throughout all today, I'm not going to be saying anything new to you all that hasn't been said a couple of times already today. Choosing how we live as we age increasingly includes working. But backing up a little bit, I thought I could talk a little bit about how times have changed since our founding. So in 1958, AARP was founded by Ethel Percy Andrus. I don't know if any of you know the story behind the founding, but it's really quite extraordinary. Prior to AARP being itself AARP, Ethel founded the National Retired Teachers Association because she found one of her colleagues, former colleagues who had retired, living in a chicken coop in the backyard of someone's house because she could not afford to live on the meager pension that she had. And so Ethel started the National Retired Teachers Association, which then became AARP. But taking a look at the population graph in 1960, which is roughly at that time, you can see that the average life expectancy was around 70. And people's career spans, were, coming into the workforce around 20 and leaving at around 55, right? This is my grandfather's generation. He retired from the USDA, where he worked in soil conservation, at the age of 55. And, he inherited a very small cottage on the coast of Maine, and he winterized it. There's actually a picture of me as a little girl sitting on the rafters of what would become the second floor of this cottage. But that was a way, it was not a long retirement that he was looking to finance, 15 years maybe on a career that lasted 35. Fast forward 100 years, and this is now what our population graph looks like. It's no longer a pyramid. We've been hearing so much today about how birth rates are declining. In fact, birth rates fell to their lowest rate in the United States in 2018. And in Colorado, the numbers that you guys showed reflects that we will have more people over the age of 65, not only in Colorado, but in the United States, than we will children 18 and under. So that's what that does to this population graph. Additionally, with life expectancy now around 80, it took a little dip during the pandemic, understandably, but life expectancy now is around 80, and so you really can't, as Chip Conley said, finance a retirement of 30 to 35 years working 30 to 35 years. It's just not possible, right? And so we need to have longer career spans now, and we are seeing that happen. And that's actually a good thing for organizations, and it's a good thing for the younger workers as well as the older workers. I have to pause, of course, however, to say that the picture's not all rosy. Age discrimination, unfortunately, is stubbornly with us. So AARP has been tracking workers 40 plus experiences with age discrimination at work since 2006. And it usually, we would do this survey about every 2 to 3 years, and we would find that around 60, sometimes 63, sort of around that percentage of workers 40 plus will have either seen age discrimination at work or would have experienced it themselves. However, when we ran this same survey in 2020 during the pandemic, that number shot up to 78%. 78% of the workforce over the age of 40 in 2020 experienced or witnessed age discrimination at work. That's huge. That's a huge, massive jump. And so I just wanted to point out that, the pandemic did have an impact on older workers. In fact, for the first time since 1973, unemployment was higher in older populations than it was in mid-career workers. Older workers left the workforce faster than workers younger, and took longer to come back. We're starting now, with the labor market conditions we have, to see employment at sort of pre-pandemic levels for the 55 to 64 age range, but the impact of early retirements and the accelerated retirements really did take a big chunk out of the older workforce, more so than the younger. In terms of what ageism looks like at work, there's a lot of ways that people can feel sidelined or not brought into the most cutting-edge projects. Maybe they're suddenly given negative performance reviews out of the blue, even though their work hasn't changed. There's lots of things, but I came across this study recently that I thought was really interesting, and it's a study around the perception of a person's own age. So imbibing kind of ageist stereotypes about ourselves and making assumptions that other people think of us that way because of our age. This was a survey of 247 workers. It was published in the European Journal of Occupational Psychology, and it showed that older workers and younger workers are laboring under a delusion that their colleagues think of them negatively because of their age. You can see that the mid-career workers what they think others think of them is they imagine that others think of them as energetic, and others actually think of them as ethical, both positive things. So the mid-career workers seem to be okay in terms of ageist perceptions. However, younger workers are afraid that people will think of them as unmotivated and irresponsible. And as it happens, their colleagues they do think of them as inexperienced, although that need not be necessarily a negative thing, but they think of them as enthusiastic. That's a lovely positive. On the other end of the spectrum, older workers think, I bet people think of me as boring, stubborn, and grumpy. And these are ageist stereotypes that we all labor under. And yet the good news is their colleagues thought of them as responsible, hardworking, and mature. So I thought this was such an interesting study because a lot of times inclusion is based on assumptions we make not only about others, but what we think others think of us. And so breaking through these kinds of perception barriers is really important to building inclusive organizations, including age-inclusive organizations. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what AARP does in this space. We do a lot of stuff. We're a big organization, and we do a lot of stuff on all types of different issues. Our state director, Bob Murphy's here, my colleague Bob Murphy is here, and the state work can vary a little bit from the national work. I'm going to talk a little bit about the national work because that's where I sit. But before I go into that, I want to say that we've been working for a couple of months with Ames, Colorado. We love this partnership. It's great. Through Ames, Colorado, we were able to get the whole state of Colorado to sign the employer pledge. It's the first state as a whole to sign the pledge. And so we're just thrilled we're just thrilled to be able to be in Colorado here with you to celebrate that. I'll talk a little bit about the pledge in a minute, but it is a nationwide group of companies that publicly affirm the value of older workers within the context of age diversity. AARP really believes that it's this mix of ages that is a real competitive advantage for organizations. a lot of the resources that my team and I put out are practical resources to help organizations leverage that diversity, that age diversity. But remembering, of course, that older workers are a valuable part of that. And I was so thrilled to hear that the Denver Museum of Art not only took the pledge, but came to one of our orientation meetings. I mean, this is just exciting for us, but seriously, because this is my team, right? And we'll get like 10 RSVPs. And we're like, okay, we're going to give an orientation today, but only 10 people are coming. So it's just lovely to hear that you came to that. Okay, so I'm going to mention advocacy first. That's something that AARP is known for on a number of fronts, as will not surprise you. So in the space of age discrimination and the value of older workers, we do a lot of work with the EEOC. The EEOC and the Department of Labor have just inaugurated in January of this year an initiative called the Hire Initiative, and it's meant to surface best practices and share those among employers on how to increase pathways to opportunity through things like skills-based hiring, which I know has been mentioned many times today, and just a way to increase diversity at work. And we have been involved in those meetings and have filed letters at public meetings to make sure that we have the voice of the older worker represented in that initiative, that age is an element of diversity that should be included and considered. Chip mentioned that only 8% of large companies include age deliberately in their DEI work. I really think this is growing. That stat is actually from the 2007 PwC CEO survey, so it's a little older now. I do hope that that's changing. Certainly, the work that I do is very much focused on that, is trying to get age. Just let's start with the foundations. Let's just put it in our strategy so that we start to measure it. And so that's what we're doing with the EEOC, sort of at that governmental level. And then in terms of state advocacy, we do have some states that focus on changing laws specifically around age discrimination or things to help older workers. I'm going to name a couple of them. We recently had an act passed in Connecticut prohibiting employers from asking for dates of graduation or age on the initial application. And this is super important. Yeah, it's a great win. It's so important because many of, especially larger companies, rely on these vendors that are, dealing with huge influx of candidates, and so they do need some kind of algorithms to help them sort and rank. And yet, what ends up happening with data that doesn't really have any relevance to the job, patterns are detected by that algorithm, and then other candidates with those same characteristics, in which case age might be one of them, get weeded out before they're even seen. So this law is really great in that now employers can't ask that in the initial application process. Another act was to create comprehensive paid family and medical leave insurance. We had another win in, again, Connecticut, requiring employers with over 5 employees to provide the payroll deduction retirement savings. So that's the Work and Save program, right? Expanding opportunities to save for retirement. Even if you're a small employer in a state with the Work and Save legislation, you can do that. It's like an easy button. It doesn't cost you anything as an employer, and you can provide that payroll deduction, which we know increases retirement savings something like 15 times. Like people are 15 times more likely to do so if they have a payroll deduction button. So that's some example of some of the advocacy we do at the federal and state levels. We also do a lot of thought leadership in this space. I'd like to mention my colleagues in AARP International. They have a learning collaborative that they have established with the OECD and the World Economic Forum called Living, Earning, and Learning Longer. I encourage you to check that out. They have a platform called Growing with Age, which is a really great website that includes a ton of research and case studies and best practices, usually at the policy level and for large global companies. But that's a great way that AARP is out in front of this on the world stage, making sure that we talk about the value of older workers. We worked with Mercer on a report, The Future of Work Megatrends. And that information can be found at this URL, aarp.org/megatrends. And working with them, we uncovered, big trends affecting the future of work, including the aging of the workforce. And lastly, my team and I actually published some research. We worked with our research team to do it, but we wanted to understand employer attitudes on upskilling and reskilling, and you can find that at that URL. And one of the interesting things we found is that while employers are now saying that they've increased their emphasis on skills over degrees, their emphasis on degrees hasn't declined. So it's sort of like we're in this transition period where employers are not quite willing to let go of degrees as a requirement because that feels safe. That's what we've done. It's been a proxy for so long, even while they are trying to move towards a more skills-based hiring that doesn't take degree into account. So that was an interesting finding that we came across. In terms of helping empower job seekers, we have a wealth of resources for job seekers. Oh, I'm sorry, I was skipping ahead of myself. I'm going to talk about our employer resources. This is the work that my team and I lead. First and foremost, we have the AARP Employer Pledge. We encourage all of you to take it. We would love to welcome you into the pledge. There's lots of benefits that come with that. We have a job board where you can post jobs to reach the 50-plus job seeker group, and you can get discounts on posting jobs if you're a pledge member. It's the only aspect of the pledge that costs anything. We do publish resources all the time. We just this June published a resource for ERG leaders on how to create an intergenerational ERG. Either create an intergenerational ERG, which is one sort of focused on specifically on generations, or to take your existing ERGs and weave generational considerations into the work of those groups. We know that DEI work is in terms of advancing it throughout the organization, kind of on the ground. ERGs are a great way to do that, and so breaking down generational stereotypes, supporting cross-directional mentoring, those are things that your ERGs can really help you with, and so our toolkit has a lot of great suggestions for that. We're also, I just got this into my inbox yesterday, the proof to review, but we're about to publish our guide to managing mixed age teams. It's a great guide that sort of talks about the philosophy of managing a mixed age team, but also has like 9 activities that you can go through, like practical exercises you can go through to help you be a more age-inclusive manager. And we know, I can't remember who was speaking, but it's, the incidence of Americans who work for a boss younger than they are is rising. It's on the rise. And it's really something that you don't want to have. You don't want to foster intergenerational, or not foster, but you want to head off intergenerational tension if you can, right? Because there's so much to be gained from intergenerational cooperation. We have lots more resources at our resource center, which you can go to aarp.org/employers. I'll mention one. This is the Age Inclusion Checklist. It's the first thing we send you when you sign the pledge. And it's sort of a framework for age inclusion. What does age inclusion look like? And it has actions you can take under each element of the framework. So suggestions that range from easy things to harder things, or bigger lifts like establishing a returnship program. And then lastly, for job seeker resources, we have a lot of job seeker resources, including the job board, which I mentioned. We also just about a year ago launched our Skills Builder for Work. This is in partnership with an organization called MindEdge, and it's just a learning platform for all types of skills. I mean, from cloud computing to accounting to certificates in HR. So there's all kinds of skills that you can take courses in and get certified in as a job seeker. If you're a member of AARP, you get discounts, of course. And by the way, I'm not sure if any of you know this, but technically you do not have to be 50 to join AARP. So you can avail yourself of that and tell your younger colleagues that, hey, if you want to get a discount on skills, a particular skill you're looking to build, you can join AARP. We do have a resume advisor as well, which you get a free resume critique and then discounts again on a package if you want help revamping your resume for a specific job. Again, sort of going back to that understanding that a lot of the job application process these days is automated, certainly at the intake process, and you want to make sure your resume beats the bots, gets past the robot sentries, as it were. The resume advisor can help. So yeah, and there's lots more there at aarp.org/work. So you can see that across the, working with job seekers, working with employers, working in the sort of thought leadership and policy community and research, and also advocacy, AARP has like a wealth of things that we're doing to promote the value of older workers and the value of age diversity. So another aspect of preaching to this great choir is that I usually talk about this topic, why does age inclusion matter? Many of you probably don't need to be convinced of this, so I'm not sure how impactful these slides will be. But the reason that age inclusion matters is demographics, right? This is a point that's been repeated a lot today. We currently have a 5-generation workforce, and by 2026, workers 50 plus will make up 35% of the labor force, which is a big chunk. It's over a third. And in fact, I did the quick math in my head. I think that it was 43% of the labor force in Colorado will be 45 plus in a couple of years. 43% is a huge portion of the workforce, right? So that's one reason why building an age-inclusive organization is a real competitive advantage. Additionally, age intersects with other aspects of identity. It's the one element of diversity that we all share as we go through our lives. And so it's also important to note that the workforce itself is becoming more racially diverse. By 2044, white people will no longer be the majority population in the US. And so the intersection of age and race, or age and sexuality, or age and gender, these are definitely things that are interesting to explore, and there's nuance to those. There's a lot about that in our intergenerational ERG toolkit. The workforce is diverse now, age-wise, and it's likely to remain so. A couple of years ago, some economists from the London School of Economics published a book called The 100-Year Life. And this is, again, predicated upon these demographic changes and the increase in life expectancy. The oldest age at which half of the babies born in 2007 are predicted to be alive in countries across the world is well over 100. You can see 102, 107, 104. I tell my 9-year-old this all the time. I say, don't be in such a hurry to get older, because you're going to live a long time. You're going to have a long working career, right? We know that age diversity improves team performance. We heard earlier today from Rick about this, that there's something about having older workers on a team that helps increase the performance if there is an inclusive environment, right? If it's a safe place to be. It tends to have a positive effect on complex problem solving and creative tasks, which certainly makes sense. Diversity of all kinds helps in those ways. So age diversity is important for team performance. It's also interesting as our skills landscape shifts and increasingly rapidly shifts, the top skills that companies are looking for and are going to need are not actually all technical. There are some that are purely technical, and digital skills are part of most jobs anyway these days. But the top skills are human skills. Those are things like critical thinking, problem solving, empathy, making judgments. And these are the types of skills that tend to take time to develop. How many of you are familiar with the notion that intelligence peaks at 25? Right? Okay. That is a total myth. I don't know how it got started, and it's because it's super depressing. If it were true, it would be very depressing. But in fact, we have different types of intelligence that peak at different times in our lives. And so EQ, as Chip Conley was referencing, emotional intelligence, this is the ability to read a room. Like if you're a salesperson or you're in negotiation or in any kind of aspect of working together, the ability to read a room, that kind of skill tends to peak around 45, 50. Vocabulary apparently peaks at 67, right? So don't play Scrabble with anybody over 65. But in other words, we have lots of different types of intelligence, and when we're younger, we have more, as Chip was talking about, fluid intelligence. That's fast, it's linear, really great memory recall, whenever my son teases me and I say, listen, you have less books in your brain than I do because I've spent a lot more time developing knowledge than you have, so it takes me longer to find the shelf to pull the piece of information out. But then, yes, then crystallized intelligence, which is what I was just referencing, comes later, that systems thinking, that holistic thinking. And these both, we need both kinds, or all kinds, in our workforce. Lastly, I wanted to mention something that emerged during the pandemic, which I found really interesting. And I found it interesting not only because of the work I do, but because this finding was replicated in a number of different independent studies or surveys. And that is that older workers and older people in general had sort of an easier time, emotionally speaking, adjusting to the pandemic when it occurred. The older generation had more resilience in sort of rolling with it and, adopting an attitude of, okay, we're going to get through this. At times, that was frustrating to me about my parents in the beginning. I was like, this is a big deal. And they were like, it's going to be okay. But I do mention that Pew found that older workers struggled less with this, not only the transition to remote work, but just this transition to working differently now during the pandemic than younger workers did. And that is an opportunity for you to leverage that resilience and stability to help your younger workers. It's not a dig on younger workers. Of course, it would be, if you hadn't had experiences like this, you might find it a little harder to adjust. But it's just something to mention in the context of recent sort of cataclysmic things that have happened, that you can leverage your older workforce to help provide that emotional stability in times like that. Okay, so implications for employers of the value of age diversity and age inclusion. First, we need to start thinking about our careers in terms of waves, not ladders, right? The idea that we would acquire a bunch of knowledge through an education period that lasts until we graduate from college or high school, stop, work for 35 years and kind of consistently go up the ladder in one profession, stop and retire and not work again. That sort of distinct three-phase life is really behind us now. Living these longer lives, we're having much more cyclical periods of going in between work, rest, and upskilling or education. And so the definition of novice is something that won't be associated as much with youth anymore. It'll just be something that we return to multiple times in our careers. It is a big shift. It has implications for things like, title and salary and equity, and those are not things I necessarily have answers to. But I think this is something we're starting to work through, that we need to sort of see we might have 3 careers in our lives, not one single profession. Or, my father, he retired from the Navy, then he had a whole second career in project management, and then now he and my mom are doing sort of more, they're in the giving back phase, so they've had sort of 3 distinct phases of their working lives. I don't know if this is helpful to you, but I thought I would just go through a couple of tips for creating age-inclusive teams, age inclusion across the organization. The first is pretty simple, ditch the stereotypes, right? It's great to pay attention across your organization to people who are sort of bucking those trends and those stereotypes. You might have someone who is much older and has come up with a brilliant new idea and is working on that, bringing that to market with younger folks. Just notice places around your organization where people are not acting according to these stereotypes. But anyway, it's just important to ditch them regardless, right? Really important to create opportunities for coaching across ages. As I said, we know that mixed-age teams perform better, and a lot of that is due to the value of sharing knowledge, again, in a place where there is safety to do so. But Chip Conley mentioned something else which I had not considered before, which is that it's possible that older workers are less competitive within the team, and so that psychological safety is sort of more present in teams that are mixed ages. But regardless, this opportunity for cross-pollination of skills occurs naturally if you're working on a project together rather than trying to manufacture it outside of a project or outside of a team environment. So that's something that really helps with age inclusion. Being collaborative, again, this sort of feels like a no-brainer, but if you manage someone who's older than you are, you're going to want to invite their honest opinion about, what do you think we should do, rather than sort of older management philosophies from like the 50s, which is command and control, right? Like, it's got to be more collaborative now. Everybody has a voice, no matter how young or old they are on the team. You really want to know what they think. You, as the leader, you still make those judgment calls, but collaboration goes a long way towards any kind of inclusion. Don't assume. Ask people. Ask your colleagues and direct reports, what do you want from this role, right? Are you in a phase in your career where your kids have just gone off to college and you've got tons of time and you want to lean back in? You're ready to really hit the ground running with your career again? Are you a younger worker or a mid-aged worker who's got a brand new baby, right? Women are having children later in life. I had my child late in life. And I have more in common as a mother with my younger colleagues who have young children than I do with my same-age colleagues who have older children in terms of parenting, right? So don't assume that someone is going to want to lean out because they're older or lean in because they're younger, right? You want to ask and give them the support they need. What are their work-life balance needs? AARP has surveyed caregivers for a while now, and the number of younger caregivers, family caregivers, continues to go up. In fact, 25% of caregivers, so what I mean by that is people taking care of older relatives, 25% of them are millennial, right? So the face of caregiving is changing, and it's becoming more age diverse as well. So ask, what are your work-life balance needs? And then, of course, respect experience, no matter how long or short it is. There are plenty of instances where your younger workers are going to have the exact skill set that you want or the experience that you want to mine. And the flip side, the same thing for your older workers. I would also, one thing I just want to point out, sometimes if you're getting resistance to a new approach, or someone is challenging a new approach, there may be some seeds of wisdom in that resistance. That doesn't mean that you want to ditch the new approach, but it's always good to get multiple opinions about if you're going in a new direction. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There may be some seeds of wisdom in there that you can mine. Of course, one thing you can do to build age-inclusive organizations is to sign the AARP Employer Pledge. It's a great way to show that you're committed to an age-diverse workforce, and you get the seal, which is sort of you can see above the text there, that you can put on your website that says you're a pledge signer. And I mentioned our resources again. You can find them at aarp.org/employers. There's tons of stuff there. And that's all. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I don't know if the hook is coming to pull me off stage, because often there's like a meter ticking down. I don't know if I've exceeded my time.
Catherine's the meter.
You're the meter. Okay, great. Thank you all for having me. I think the work you do is so important, and I'm really energized by today's conversations. Yes.
Somebody from the live stream audience asked, your mic's not on. That's why I'm pausing. Somebody from the live stream audience asks if they can take the employer pledge as an HR professional on his or her own, or do they have to get a formal HR rep of their large company to do so?
That's a great question. We didn't conceive of it as an individual pledge, but we've had plenty of HR professionals sign it, and I don't know that they've necessarily always told the CHRO they're doing it. So I would encourage you to sign it anyway, because then we stay in touch with you. We invite you to our quarterly meetings where we feature speakers on various topics. And so you can just get connected to those resources. So I'd encourage you to do it anyway. However, we hadn't conceived of it as purely individual. We want to list your organization as a pledge signer. So if you think that that's going to get you in hot water, you should check.
Thank you.
Thank you.